Okay, welcome back. In our third episode, which is the most recent episode, we established why God did not immediately blot out Lucifer. And the reason was God is love. And the other reason, and because He is love, God is long suffering. He allows His creatures to make their own decisions and is ready to be hurt, either to be hurt or to be pleased by the decisions they make. So, in the instance of Lucifer, Lucifer made decisions which really hurt God. But because He's love, He is long suffering. So He had to allow the rebellion continue, develop, and the other reason that came up was that God wanted His other creatures to serve Him from love and not from fear. And so they had to learn the causes and let's see the conflict develop and then decide in their hearts never to do the same thing as Lucifer had done. So that is what we established in the third episode. In this fourth episode, we are going to look at the results of this primeval conflict Lucifer begins against God and Michael. So we shall start with a quotation from the Bible Commentary, Volume 7, published in 1957 by the E.G. White Estate. On page 973, the first paragraph, Ellen White is quoted to have written, quote, "The evil continued to work until the spirit of disaffection ripened into active revolt. Then there was war in heaven, and Satan, with all who sympathized with him, was cast out. Satan had warred for the mastery in heaven and had lost the battle. God could no longer trust him with honor and supremacy, and these, with the part he had taken in the government of heaven, were taken from him." So uh, Satan lost the trust God had in him, and with all the angels he got to his side, they were cast out of heaven. And so that is the recording we have in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7 to 8. And that actually constitutes the first part of this first casting. By casting, we mean that uh, Satan or Lucifer and his angels are cast out of heaven. The first casting, that is the first casting. And in the first part, which we find in Revelation chapter 7, verse 8, and I mean Revelation chapter 12, let's go back there. Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 to verse 8, we read, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven." So the conflict Lucifer began with God and Michael, or against God and Michael, resulted in him being cast out from heaven. Now we note he is cast out from heaven. This casting is represented in the words which we have just read, "Neither was their place found anymore in heaven." So Lucifer's place and his angel's place was not anymore found in heaven. But we remember that this casting happens when the other worlds are existing and our world not yet. So uh, our world does not exist, other worlds exist, and so Lucifer is cast out. It is noteworthy that the verse only indicates that Lucifer and his angels lost their place in heaven. That is Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 and 8. Lucifer and his angels lost their place in heaven. That is, they no longer had a place or work there. It does not indicate, however, where they ended up, where they were cast to. So the question that comes up is, where did they end up? Now, uh, when you read Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, it talks about the inauguration of Christ, and that is after Christ has ascended to heaven. And in painting the picture of the inauguration of Christ after his ascension, Ellen White lists seraphim, cherubim, the commanders of the angel hosts, the sons of God, which we are going to look at below, whom she identifies as representatives of the unfallen worlds to have been present. So these are present when Christ is being inaugurated in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. But then she comments and she says, quote, "The heavenly council before which Lucifer had accused God and his son, the representatives of those sinful realms over which Satan had thought to establish his dominion, all are there to welcome the Redeemer." End of quote. That is still Desire of Ages, 1898, page 834, page 834. Now, what we see in this particular quote is that Satan had thought to establish his dominion in those unfallen worlds. And how could he do that? How could he do that? In particular, that quote helps us conclude that the only way Satan would have had dominion over the worlds is by making them sin against God. And I remember in one of the episodes we established that because Satan had succeeded in convincing a third of the angels, he thought he could also succeed in convincing the other worlds to join him in rebellion. And we discovered that he actually failed to do that. But the only way he could do that would be by making them sin also against God, or have disbelief, or lose confidence in the words of God and in the law of God. And so that would mean that uh, when he was cast out from heaven, his first thought or his first place was to go and convince all those other worlds to join him. We don't know exactly how many they are, but I am certain, and we are certain, that there are many, possibly in billions. I can't really tell, but they are many in this vast universe of God. Now, while he managed to win our world later on, as we shall see, while he managed to win our world and got dominion over it, we are going to look at that, he did not manage with the other worlds. Hence the term unfallen worlds, which Ellen White uses so much with them. They did not fall. They refused the traps of Lucifer. They refused his attempts to convince them to join him in the rebellion. And so we can thus conclude that his being able to dwell on those worlds uh, and to have them join him would be because they would have accepted him. Just as it happened on our world, we are going to explore that more, just as it happened with us, that he now dwells here simply because we accepted him. And so, actually, our acceptance, as we are going to see, is also a part of this first casting. The first casting roughly is divided into two parts. The first part is that Lucifer is cast out of heaven. And that casting does not indicate to us where did he go, but what we learn from Ellen White is that he tried to convince the other worlds to join him in rebellion, and they refused. And so, when our world is brought into view, then we see some other events happen. Now, when Christ talks about this particular casting from heaven, in Luke chapter 10, Luke 10, verse 18, it says, "And he said, To them, that is, Christ said unto them, unto his disciples, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Now, as the 70 disciples rejoiced of their victories over devils through Christ's name, in the mission he had sent them to, Christ reflected upon and recalled the sins of the past in which he, as Michael and his angels, had thrown Satan out of heaven. And that is the verse we've read. And you find more emphasis on that in Desire of Ages, page 490, paragraphs 1 to 3. And Satan, Christ, says he beheld, because he was there, he was Michael, he beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Now that is the first part of the first casting. Now let us go and look at the second part of this first casting. Remember, the first casting constitutes of two parts, which we can see in Revelation. In Revelation 12, the first part of the casting is Satan is thrown out of heaven. And when he's thrown out of heaven, he actually tries to convince the other worlds to join him in rebellion, and he fails because they refuse. So that is the first part of the first casting. Now, when we look at the second part of the first casting, we can use Revelation chapter 12 still. Revelation 12, and that is verse 9. It says, it's this highlighted one, that one. No, actually, let me use another Bible because there are so many verses there which are highlighted. Let me use this. Revelation chapter 12, and we are in verse 9. There, it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, it is in the quotation we read, Desire of Ages, page 834, paragraph 1. In that quote we read above, it showed us that Satan was rejected by the other worlds. He tried to convince them, but they refused. And those worlds pre-existed Earth. We saw that already in the previous episode, actually. In the previous episodes, I think that was episode number 2. Those worlds pre-existed Earth. They existed before Earth. However, we know he was accepted by us. Now, this acceptance is represented here in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. That is, he was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, we may think that actually this casting, the idea that he's cast into the earth means that God threw him onto this earth. No, that is not what it means. But that casting out into the earth, or that allowing him to dwell on earth, comes from us. We accept him. Our world became his dwelling place in the vast universe of God, his command center and his dominion. It is important to note that his rejection by other worlds indicates that he had sought acceptance there, but in vain. We've seen this already in the first part of the first casting, that when Lucifer was thrown out of heaven, he no longer has a place to live. He has to go to the other worlds and try to convince them. And those other worlds, of course, have leaders. And those leaders, as our world had Adam as the leader, those leaders refused to accept him. And because they refused, now he still has nowhere to go. And then he comes to our world. He is accepted in our world. And by virtue of being accepted in our world, the phrase comes, he is cast into the earth. The acceptance of the acceptance into our world is what is represented in Genesis chapter 3 by Satan using the serpent as his medium, beguiling Eve, and Adam following his wife in the sin. The result of this is that Satan got dominion over our world. Moreover, we also remember, as seen already, that like us, the other worlds had two trees. The one was forbidden. We saw that. Now, because we have accepted Satan in our world, or because through Adam and Eve, Satan was accepted in our world, and that he was thrown onto our world, or our world became his place, then he becomes the prince of this world. Now, let's build on that a bit. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, 28, 26 to 28. It says, verse 26 says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." Okay. Verse 27. "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." Verse 29. "And God blessed them. And God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." What do we want to notice here? God gives dominion to the created beings, the man and the woman he had created. He gives them dominion over everything he had created. Now, while in the creation of God, God had delivered everything he had created on this world under man. While in the creation of man, God had delivered everything he had created on this world under man. That is what we've read in Genesis 1, 26 to 28. Satan makes a bold claim. Well, that is true. Later on, we see Satan making a bold claim that all that was delivered to him. Let us look at that bold claim. Let us look at it. We go to Luke chapter 4, and that is verse 6. Luke chapter 4, verse 6. It says, "And the devil said unto him," the him there is Christ, "All this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will I give it. If thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine." Now, this is the claim Lucifer makes. He says that everything he had shown Christ, this is in the wilderness of temptation, everything he had shown Christ had been delivered to him. We certainly know that God did not deliver it to him. Christ did not deliver it to him. There is no angel that delivered it to him. So the only one who could have done that was Adam. And that is nowhere else but by choosing to heed to Satan's voice through his wife during Adam's fall, or man's fall in Eden. So when man fell in Eden, he gave everything he had been given to Satan. The man who was created was, as we read, and before we read, let me just go there. That is Psalm, the 8th Psalm, very, very beautiful Psalm, the 8th Psalm, and that is verse 5. It says, "For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor." So the man who was created was crowned with glory and honor, and made but just a little lower than the angels. However, Since the man sold his dominion to another, the devil, Christ in several places recognizes that the princehood of this world had changed from Adam to Satan. For instance, he says in several verses, let's go there. Uh, let's use this Bible. One of them is John 12:31. John, John 12, John 12:31. 30, that is 30, but that one is just them. It says, now is the judgment of this world. Let me highlight it. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. We shall look at that verse later on, but what we want to focus on is the idea that Christ talks about Satan as the prince of this world. Let's go to John 14, and that is verse 30. John 14, verse 30. John 14, verse 30 says, let me see if I can get, okay, that's a much better highlighter. It says, henceafter I will not talk much with you, for the prince of this world cometh, and hath nothing in me. Still referring to Satan, calling him the prince of this world. Should we see another one? Of course, of course. That is now John chapter 16, verse 11. John 16, verse 11 says, of judgment, because the prince of this world is judged. So in all these references, Christ recognizes that the princehood of this world had changed from Adam to Satan, rightfully. And rightfully because uh, Adam gave it away by choice. Adam gave it away. Now, a similar language to Christ's language is also used by Paul, though there is a slight difference, but it's still, the implication is similar. You can go. We can find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4. He says, in whom, talking about the men of this world that have rejected the truth, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest by the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. So Satan, who is the God of this world, small g, the God of this world, has blinded men in this world that they should not accept the truth. So, Paul seems to imply that Satan is a god of this world. This is because it's not yet cleansed of sin, and the principles of sin still rule in it. We remember that Christ, John the Apostle, and others also recognize this fact. That is, the world is still with the stain of sin in it, and the workings of sin rule over men until its cleansing. So, what have we established so far? That the result of the conflict Lucifer began against God and against Christ, which he began because Christ had made being an equal to God, that conflict resulted in one, Lucifer being cast from heaven. And that is the first part of the first casting. He is cast from heaven, then he wanders to all the worlds that God had created, trying to get dominion in them, but failed. And so, when he is cast out and rejected by the other worlds, he comes to our world, and our world has been now created, and he comes to our world and attempts our our father and mother, that is Eve and Adam and Eve, and they accept him. So when they accept him, the second part of the first casting happens. That is, Satan or Lucifer is cast into this earth. In other words, he is allowed by our parents to take possession of this earth. So this earth becomes his center of rebellion, his command center. He becomes the prince of this world, as we've seen. Jesus constantly refers to him as that. And we've also seen that when in tempting Christ, he says, everything has been delivered unto me, and so he can give it to whomsoever he wants, whomsoever worships him. So that is basically what we've established in the conflict, in the results of the conflict Satan waged. This is the first conflict of the three conflicts that Satan has waged. This is the first, and he wages it against God because of the exalted position Christ had been given. So, what is the summary of this primeval conflict? Here is actually the summary. The key points to note: in the very first universal conflict, Satan began against God. 1. It was against the Most High. It attacked his wisdom and his discretion in making Christ, and not Lucifer, equal with him. 2. It attacked the law of God that governed the universe and angels. 3. It happened in heaven when the other worlds existed, but before our world was ever created. And number 4, it had 4 key results. The first result is Satan and his angels lost their place and their work in heaven and the presence of God. That is the first part of the first casting. We read that in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 to verse 8. Number 2, Satan wandered around the already existing worlds of God, seeking sympathy and a place to dominate, but failed. Number 3, finally, he was accepted on our world when, after its creation, he led our first parents to sin against God, as we see in Genesis chapter 3. This is the second part of the first casting. We see that in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. So what happened? Our world became his dominion and his base, a new place from which he could launch his attacks against the government of God. Secondly, the other worlds rejected him. Now finally, Adam lost dominion over our world, and it was passed to Satan. We saw that in Luke chapter 4, verse 5 to verse 6. So that wraps up the first conflict. The very first conflict Lucifer wages, and he wages it against God because of the exalted position that Christ had been given. So in the next episodes, we shall look at the second conflict. And the second conflict is waged by Satan against Christ himself. Against Christ himself. And with that, I pray that God may bless you. Amen.